I used to work as a pharmacy tech in a small convenience store, which I won't mention to avoid problems. It doesn't really matter though, as I think people have a good idea of that kind of store. I worked there for around 10 months before moving to my current job at a hospital, and though things were generally tame at the pharmacy, I do have a collection of stories which are funny, odd, and scary. However, there was one experience that was terrifying, and incidentally it's the most terrifying thing to happen to me in my entire life. It happened after I'd been at the store for about 4 months. The store and pharmacy were open 24 hours, though as you may have guessed, things slowed way down during the night. In fact, there were usually less than 10 customers total in the store between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m., and maybe only 1 or 2 who'd come through the drive-thru to pick up a prescription. It was around 1 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, and the pharmacist and I were both watching things on our laptops. I'll refer to the pharmacist on call with me that evening as Tom. I think Tom was in his 50s, though he was pretty fit. Tom was kind of gruff sometimes, but underneath it he was a kind man, and he'd help out if more things needed to be done. I was watching a documentary about an AI beating a human at the board game Go, and I'm not sure what Tom was doing. We saw the drive-thru lane start to light up, meaning someone was pulling up. We both set down our laptops, and I went to the window and got ready to pick up the phone. A blue Chevy pickup truck drove up and then stopped quickly. The window was already down, and before I could pick up the phone to greet the customer, the man started yelling that he had a prescription sent over and needed it. This took me completely off guard, especially at 1 a.m. Though there were some strange people that came in overnight, no one had been this aggressive. The man looked to be in his 40s and had long, greasy hair, and I'm glad I wasn't able to smell him through the window. Over his yelling, I said hello and assured the man that we'd help get his prescription. I had to ask for his name twice before he told me. I'll call him Ben for this story, though that's obviously not his real name. Ben told me his name really fast, so fast that I had to ask for it again. He raised his voice even more as he repeated his name, and told me to hurry up. At that point, Tom came over and told the man that we were working on getting his prescription, but that he needed to remain calm and answer this lady's questions. For context, I was 27 and rather petite at the time. So it was probably Tom's physique and demeanor that encouraged the man to lower his voice. I was hoping his prescription would pop up when I put his name in, and my heart sank when it didn't. I asked Ben for his address, praying he wouldn't start yelling at me again. Ben told it to me in a very exasperated tone, but then still nothing came up when I put it in our system. Tom had remained by my side, and he gestured for me to give him the phone. That was a weight off my shoulders, and in that moment Tom was truly my guardian. Tom said very matter-of-factly that we couldn't find any prescription in our computer, and asked Ben when it might have been sent over. Ben apparently didn't appreciate being asked that question, as he started yelling at Tom to just get it. Tom remained calm and asked the man what the prescription was for. Ben told Tom it was for Norco, which for those who don't know is a combination of Tylenol and hydrocodone, which is an opioid. Norco can be prescribed for more severe pain, including patients with chronic pain and those recovering from minor surgeries. As you might have guessed, Norco is a common opioid of abuse, and its use and prescription have to be closely monitored, potentially with legal repercussions. When the man said that he had been given a prescription for Norco, I knew the situation was more dangerous, and Tom knew it too. He told the man to wait one moment and gestured for me to walk a few steps away, which would be out of view of the window. Tom told me in a very calm voice that he was afraid the man might try to come into the store, and asked me to call 911. My blood ran cold, and I almost fainted as I picked up one of the phones and dialed 911. While I did that, Tom started jogging over to the front of the store and locked the doors. He told the cashier, the one other employee currently with us that evening, to come with him to the pharmacy area. The employee was a 20-year-old man I'll call Marco, and he knew something was about to go down, so he came quickly and quietly. When Tom and Marco got back to the pharmacy room, Tom locked the entrance door as well as the other door that led to the break room. He pulled the metal shield down over the inside window and told me and Marco to wait by the other side of the room. When Tom stepped back into view, Ben immediately started yelling. Tom said calmly that he would continue to try to find the man's prescription, but only if he lowered his voice and was respectful. As we all figured at that point, the man lost it and started hurling insults and death threats at Tom. Tom, who must have been prepared beforehand, quickly pulled the metal shield down over the pharmacy window. He informed Ben through the speaker that he was calling the cops. Ben kept yelling for a few moments before we heard his car door open. I almost screamed when he started yelling again and banging on the metal shield. I expected Tom to say or do something, but instead he put a finger to his lips. I think he realized there was no reasoning with the man, and the best thing to do now was to try to stay calm and quiet. After what seemed like a minute, Ben stopped yelling and banging, and we heard him get back into his car and speed off. None of us wanted to move though, and another minute later our sinking suspicion was confirmed. We heard the sound of breaking glass coming from the other side of the building, meaning Ben had broken one of the doors or windows at the front of the store and was coming inside. He started yelling again, and we heard what sounded like aisles crashing over. The yelling steadily got louder until it was right outside the pharmacy room. It was again Tom's presence that had helped us mentally prepare and remain calm when that man started banging on the shield inside. After about 30 seconds he gave up, but then after a moment we heard one loud bang. A few seconds later we heard another one. It was actually somewhat deafening. Apparently Ben had found a large object to try to bash the shield in. Tom reassured us quietly that the shield shouldn't give way, but that if it did, we'd be alright. I guess that meant he'd confront Ben if he made it inside. I was praying that wouldn't happen. I can't tell you how good it felt when I heard sirens outside and the cops announcing their presence. Ben turned away from the shield and seemed to be yelling at the cops, but they yelled back, and a moment later we heard an object clink on the floor. He must have set down whatever he had been using to try to bash in the shield. I think the cops had him get down on the ground and put him in cuffs before leading him out of the building. When they knocked on our door to give us the all clear and we came out, Ben wasn't there. As I expected, a few shelves had been knocked down, though overall he didn't do too much damage. The object Ben had been using was a metal lawn chair that was still wrapped in its packaging. There was a big to-do, and we had to meet with the management and counselors, and I took a few days off. But overall, I think I took it well. The fact that we had metal shields and that Tom was there that night were two very important reasons. I'm not sure if Ben was his real name, or even if he had tried to get a prescription sent over. My theory was that he was trying to intimidate us in hopes that we'd give him a few Norcos so he'd leave, which of course we wouldn't do. Either way, it's sad to think about how much of a problem opioid addiction is, and I'm just glad that none of us were harmed that night. I work in a large club store in a medium-sized city. I'd mostly do stock work, and overall things are pretty chill. We close at 8 on weeknights, and we'd usually be out of there by 8:30. I personally prefer the late shift, since there'd be fewer customers at the end, and I could just zone out with whatever I was doing. However, there was one night, and one person, that I'll never forget. On the night in question, I and 2 other employees were closing up. After they finished their stock work, the 2 other dudes headed out. I had one more set of items to stock, which was candy, so I was in the middle of the store in the candy section. I was almost done when I thought I heard someone talking from somewhere in the distance. I looked up, but couldn't see much over the aisles. I assumed it was one of the other 2 employees who came back because they forgot something, and I went ahead and finished stocking. I pulled the pallet back towards the stockroom in the back of the store, and this is where I started to get creeped out. As I was walking, I heard the talking again. It was very faint, and I wasn't actually sure if whoever it was had stopped and started, or if they had just continued to talk at a low volume this entire time. It also didn't seem to be coming from the back by the stockroom area, but rather in one of the aisles to the side of the store. My heart started to beat faster as I put the pallet and pallet jack back in the stockroom, and the realization that I might be alone in the building with an intruder sank in. I walked into the break room and locked the door, and texted the 2 people who had just left if either of them had come back. Neither of them answered. I then called each of them, and they told me that they hadn't come back after they left. My heart was racing now as I considered my options. I really didn't want to confront whoever might be out there, but I also didn't feel ready to call the cops just yet. Maybe I was in denial, but I thought there was a chance it could be another employee. I went into the surveillance room and checked all the cameras, but I didn't see anyone. It dawned on me that maybe someone just left a speaker in one of the aisles, though why I didn't hear it before I wasn't sure. I sat there for a good 5 minutes, waiting for someone to pop out, but they never did. Finally, I decided to get on the PA system and request that anyone still in the building come to the front of the store to provide assistance. While it was true that I was in the back of the store, I didn't want to give away my location in case there was an intruder, and rather, I wanted to fool them into coming to the front. Again, I was expecting someone to pop out, but they didn't. I started to like my speaker idea more as some of my fears subsided. I went ahead and left the employees only area and walked to the side of the store where I thought the talking was coming from. However, it was now dead silent, and this was a bigger store, so I had no idea where it could be. I must have walked up and down the aisles for almost 10 minutes, looking and listening, but to no avail. Just as I was about to head back, turn off the lights and leave the building, the talking started again. This time it sounded like it was a few aisles over, and to my horror, it didn't sound like something that would be coming from a speaker. Instead, it seemed like a deranged lunatic, repeating some kind of phrase that I couldn't make out, over and over. I froze, not knowing what to do. A moment later the talking stopped, which was terrifying since it meant I could no longer tell where that person was if they moved. I started walking back to the employees only section, which thankfully was in the other direction from where I heard that person. I was almost back when I rounded a corner and saw the most horrific sight of my life. There, at the other end of the aisle, was a man. He was smiling and slowly rocking back and forth, and his eyes, which were completely deranged, were looking right at me. I took off running and instinctively went to one of the emergency exits. I slammed open the door and the alarm started blaring. Then I ran around the building, got in my car, and floored it. There was a shopping center that was still open about a mile away, and after parking, I dialed 911 and explained the situation. Eventually the cops arrived and I gave a statement. Then they accompanied me back to the store. When we got back, the alarms were still blaring, and we went inside and I shut them off. The cops called for backup and did a thorough sweep of the store, but couldn't find that man. Luckily, nothing appeared to be stolen or broken. The general manager also came in, and when we reviewed the surveillance footage, things only got weirder. The footage showed the man walk out from between stacks of food jars in one of the aisles about 30 seconds before I heard him talking for the last time. After he came out, he just stood there for a while, before slowly walking to the end of the aisle, and then walking over to the end of the aisle where I saw him. Apparently my presence didn't faze him, and after I took off running through the emergency exit, the man followed slowly in that direction. After he got outside, he just walked into the field behind our building and faded from view. But what really shocked us was how the man entered, or rather, how we couldn't tell how he entered. Even after the manager came back and reviewed the footage with other employees the next day, for the life of us, we couldn't figure out how or when the man entered. Things were much slower in the evenings, and we could see that no one came in or out of that space in that aisle for at least an hour or two before closing. The man must have come in when the store was more crowded, and then just waited for hours. We were supposed to check that club members had their cards when they walked in, but it wasn't impossible to sneak past whoever was at the front. That was our conclusion of how the man entered. As far as why the man snuck in and then stayed hidden for hours, we couldn't be sure. If he was trying to wait until after the store closed to steal something, then why did he give away his position by talking, or leaving the aisle when he did after waiting for hours? Maybe he was filming a prank, but he seemed rather old, and again, why would he just talk to himself? But the most obvious explanation was that he was insane, and judging by his smile and the look in his eyes, that was exactly what he was. I still have no idea what was going through his mind, but in the end, I'm just glad that I didn't have to physically confront him. During the summers, I used to work at our local movie theater while I was still going to high school. It actually wasn't that bad, and the manager who was usually on duty while I was there was a bit of a pushover. My friends Aaron and Steve also worked there during the last summer before our senior year, and sometimes we just goof off a bit whenever we happened to be there at the same time. Overall it was pretty chill, but this one night was completely terrifying. It was a little after midnight and the last movie just let out. There were only a handful of people who had come to see it, and after they left, it was just me and the manager on duty, Blake. Technically, Blake wasn't supposed to leave while I was still there, but he didn't really care. He told me to make sure the theater was clean and then turn the lights off and lock up. And with that, I was alone. Now, I hadn't been afraid of being alone, as I was a big bad high schooler, so this didn't really bother me. I went into the theater with a broom and dustpan and started walking around the aisles. I wasn't super thorough, so it only took me like a minute. But just as I got to the other side of the theater and was about to walk through the set of doors on that side, I heard a door on the other side close. For reference, all but one or two of the theaters had two entrances, one on each side, and each entrance had two sets of doors. I had no idea who could have been at the other side of the theater, but figured it was probably one of the patrons who had forgotten something. I walked back over to that side and looked through the doors, which had windows in them so you could see to the outside. No one was there. I walked through them and back into the hallway. It was completely deserted. I stayed quiet to listen, but didn't hear anything. Honestly, that was a bit concerning, as if the person really had been a moviegoer, then they must have either run back outside or ducked into another theater. There were other possibilities, however, including Aaron or Steve just messing with me, or a couple of teenagers such as myself coming to the theater to fool around. I didn't want to get in trouble in case someone trashed the theater or stole something, so I decided to track down whoever that was. I went to the lobby at the front, which was also deserted, and I checked the doors, which were all still locked. This particular theater had two hallways coming off of the lobby, which led to each of the individual theaters. I quickly ran over and looked down the other hallway, but didn't see anyone there either. Next, I checked each of the bathrooms. No one was in there. At this point, I was thinking it was Aaron and/or Steve, so I texted them. Aaron texted me a few minutes later saying that he was right behind me, but after I looked around, I was essentially completely sure he was joking. Steve didn't return my text, but I didn't text him again right away. Instead, I decided to start yelling and running through the theaters, quickly pushing through one set of double doors to get in and then the other one to get out. There were only 12 theaters, so this wouldn't actually take that long. I did it, but I didn't find anyone. I got back to the lobby, a bit out of breath. At this point, I was getting pretty annoyed and just wanted to leave. I checked my phone and saw that Aaron had texted me, asking if the killer got me, and Steve hadn't texted yet. I texted and then called Steve, who had apparently been asleep, and he told me he wasn't at the theater messing with me. While I was still sure I heard the door close deliberately before, I decided that I had done enough to check things out and would just head home. However, as I was about to leave through the front doors, I nearly jumped as I saw a figure dressed in all black standing at the end of one of the hallways. He seemed to notice me, as a second later he walked slowly to one of the theater entrances and opened the door. It shut behind him without him saying a word. I was officially freaked out, but still decided to run over and confront whoever that was. I slammed my way through the double doors and yelled for whoever was in there to come out, but I didn't see or hear anyone. I kept yelling and walked aggressively up and down each of the aisles, but still no one was there. I was upset, but I stopped because I didn't know where that person could be. I did a few 360s, but I still couldn't find them. I was reasonably sure they hadn't already left the theater, but they didn't appear to be inside. There also weren't any places someone could hide, like behind a curtain by the screen, or a trash can for instance. I walked up and down a few more times, checking under every seat, and no one was there. I forcefully pushed open the entrance on the other side of the theater, since I thought whoever that was maybe just hiding in the space below the windows and the double doors. But they weren't. Right after I walked into the hallway, I ran back inside the theater and to the other set of double doors. Still nothing. Whoever this person was must have been quick on their feet. I went back into the hallway and there was still no one in sight. I called Blake, but when he didn't pick up, I just said screw it and decided to leave. Since he was my superior and was supposed to be there with me, it was his problem now. I walked back into the lobby and made a loud announcement with my voice that whoever was in there needed to stop effing around and just leave. Then, I kid you not, I saw that guy walk back out of the same theater. He walked to the end of the hallway and then just stood there, not saying anything like before. This guy was toying with me, and I ran in his direction. But before I got there, he pulled out a gun. In that instant, my anger turned into terror, and I froze in my tracks. The man wasn't pointing the gun at me, but rather just had it pointed down to the side. He must have been wearing a mask because I couldn't see his face. I made a gesture with my hands and started to back away. The man didn't move, including moving his gun, and I eventually backed up all the way to the front doors. I turned slightly away so I could get the keys out of my back pocket without the man seeing it, as I didn't want to give the impression I was drawing a weapon. I got them, and then unlocked the door and walked outside. Once I was out of view, I ran to my car and floored it. I drove all the way home and called the cops while still sitting in my driveway. When the cops came to our house, my parents woke up, and when I explained to them what just happened, my mom became hysterical. She pleaded with the cops to not have me go back to the theater to look for the man, and they agreed. They told us they'd do a thorough search, and I warned them that whoever that was very fast. The cops didn't find the man, and the next day when we met with the theater manager, Blake got chewed out a bit. School was starting in 2 weeks, so I just quit, and that was the last time I worked at the theater. I'm not sure if they ever found the man or figured out who he was, but maybe the strangest detail was that the gun wasn't real. When the cops went to the theater, they found the gun at the end of that hallway where the man had been standing. But it wasn't a real gun, or even an airsoft or paintball gun. It was literally just a toy gun that didn't shoot anything. The man had to be some kind of lunatic that got pleasure from messing with people. But how he was able to move so quickly and quietly still baffles me. In the end, I'm just glad that things didn't get physical.